is an environmental economist with the World Bank. She founded Think Policy in 2019, which promotes an analytical mindset to better policy making. And of course, Mr. Aldi Haryopratomo, give the biggest round of applause. Mr. Aldi is a digital business founder and investor. He has founded and lead various startups, including Mapan, Gopay, Efishery, and Halodoc. So I would also like to invite everybody to listen and to maybe write down some notes, because I would open the question and answer sessions after. But of course, if you would like to allow me to ask the first question first to open our discussion. So I would like to start off with Ma Afu. May I call you Ma Afu then?
Yes, please.
Ma Afu, I think we have heard what Ms. Mahbubani said about the future of ASEAN, what we can do if the CIA is completed. Of course, it's all sounds like a rainbow and unicorn and rainbow. But I think what are the harsh reality that we are facing right now? And speaking of the goals in 2045, what do you think is the foundation policy to make sure that we can actually achieve that goals?
Thanks so much for that question. Before I check if you can hear me.
Yes, I think we're saying goodbye to some of the distinguished guests today. But I would also like to please enjoy the rest of the luncheon today. I think this is great. I think this is a great time for the policymakers, leaders of today, who would actually want to listen to what the youngsters have to say. Because, you guys have the perspective. You guys have the new perspective of seeing things. The harsh reality. You're going to be to taking care of our future. If it's not the young leaders, I think, of course, we're thanking all the policy leaders right now that are joining us today, that have to, that they opened the pathway for us. But I think you guys, we are the one who's going to, actually live the future, right?
Yes, for sure. Let me start by extending a warm regards first, or greetings, to Pa Sofyan Jalil as the CEO of IBC, and all the distinguished leaders and invited persons in this room. I think, first of all, at the discourse level, I think the message we should be sending out is a message of cautious optimism.
Conscious optimism.
I think for the longest time, the story of the relationship between development and climate outcomes have been a story of pessimism, a story of reverse or negative relationship where you need to compromise between one or the other. That's why even though, for example, in the past 25 years of democracy in Indonesia, there's been plenty of positive development outcomes, starting from, you can see GDP income per capita, for example, percentage of access to electricity, urbanization, non-agricultural jobs. All the statistics have been, improving in the past 25 years. This has not been complemented with the same positive outcomes on the environment side, right? On the climate side. So if the question is what kind of policy do we need to push forward, I would say that one, it should be a policy that first of all acknowledge that there is a possible positive relationship between the environment and economic
Changing
growth.
the perspective, as you said.
Exactly. And second, one that actually reverse the current incentives towards that direction. So
I'm sorry, but do you think that it's already happening now, or are we just like suggesting it right now?
We're barely at the beginning.
We're barely at the beginning, of course.
During my, I'm not anymore with the World Bank, but during my 5 years as an economist with the World Bank, one major report that we published actually focuses on identifying what possible positive relationship would look like. Okay. So we look at enabling policies across at least 4 pillars. One is the very economic incentives. So what are the fiscal policy that would align the incentives for private actors, for all the stakeholders to actually invest more in climate actions. Mm-hmm. Second is related to the investment climate regulations. So how do we enable an environment where the private sector are actually welcome to take more climate action, to actually invest more in the right kind of climate positive or climate relevant decarbonization action, and then trade policies for sure, and finally the financing gap. So how do we actually close
The
the
gaps.
need to finance many of the green projects that needs to be achieved. So right now, if we're thinking about 2045, currently, despite a lot of, we're at the, so you asked where we are right now,
Yeah.
right? We're barely at the beginning of a decoupling journey where while pushing for economic growth, we want the emissions trajectory to actually decline. So instead of looking at them separately, one indicator that we want to focus on is actually emissions intensity. So how do we make sure, how do we look at the GDP growth relationship with the per capita emissions for Indonesia? And right now, even though the trend, the 3-year average trend in the past 10 years has been relatively declining, but Indonesia remains at the top of the emissions intensity indicator across the globe. And this is primarily because our economy is still very much resource intensive. It's still very carbon intensive. So it's not impossible. It's not necessarily a negative story.
Yeah.
I think it's a story
It's
of
just the harsh
opportunity.
reality.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's a story of opportunity for so the carbon economy basically is a transition economy. It's an opportunity for the industries, for the manufacturing sectors, also for the primary sector to explore and invest in lower carbon options. And technology has been actually, moving with us. Technology has been a lot cheaper, a lot more affordable in the past 10 years. In the private sector, I think part of the leaders of the private sector are ready to also move towards decarbonization. Some of them have established or have committed to a net zero plan towards 2050. But I think it's exactly the policies that needs to go towards the right direction, because without the right fiscal incentives, so we're talking about carbon pricing policies, for example. How do we disincentivize carbon intensive type of sectors or actually move them towards lower carbon options? The kind of policies in the financial sector, I think Aldi is also here an expert in that. How do we make sure that we will not just rely on the public sector financing, because it will take a lot of resources to get there, but actually open up the space for private sector investment as well towards the right kind of policy.
I think it's leading to our conversation that we had just before. I mean, like what happened with, it's super funny that Mr. Mabubani mentioned about the CII, because I think we can actually learn something from China, but we cannot really implement everything that works for China, that works for us. What do you think that we can do to, get a head start of this opportunity, if I may say that?
No, thank you. Thank you for the time, Pak Sofyan, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, right? China.
Yes, exactly.
So the question is, what kind of policy framework and collaboration can we do so that the economic growth that we have here is not just taken over by China, right? And so I have a proposed framework, right? So in China, the way that they really drove innovation was top-down, right? They also, which means that every policy, because I had Tencent and Meituan as an investor in my previous company, so I spent a bunch of time in Beijing and Shenzhen. And the first thing was, it was top-down. They always had somebody from the Communist Party inside the company driving policy. It was very clear. The second thing was, they always thought global. Tencent invested in Gopay, which was nothing at the time, right? But they wanted to be global. The third thing was that now they're starting to be inclusive. That's why they delayed the Ant Financial IPO and so forth. They want to be inclusive. For ASEAN, we cannot just copy. If we want to prevent China from taking over all our industries, we have to be different. So my proposal is actually only change one of those three. The first one is that we have to be gotong royong, or collaborative.
Yeah.
There's no way that you can be top-down in Indonesia or in ASEAN. It's too unstructured.
It's just not us.
And then the second one is we still have to be global. We often fight about the pie locally, but we don't actually think about how to be global. And the third one is to be inclusive. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share a couple of examples.
Sure.
So that it's really tangible of how this happened, because I was involved in a few shaking up of industries, right? So the first one is QR, right? Everybody's seen the QR payments, right? So when we started GoPay, I looked at China. In China, they use mostly devices that are where you scan your phone, right? That was their payment model. And our competition at the time, Dana, was trying to bring that to Indonesia. But I, at GoPay, didn't think that would work. Well, honestly, because we didn't have the technology at GoPay, so paper was much cheaper. Right? That was the, But also, actually, there was a better way to do it with paper, right? So you print a QR, it's like 50 cents versus $400, right? We would make more money renting out the devices, but we chose the cheaper route. So what did I do, right? It was actually illegal to deploy paper QRs at the time. So of course, me being the young, I was way younger back then, right? So those 5 years aged me really well. So we deployed the QR, and it worked. It worked really well, so well that BI said, slapped my hand and said, "Hey, sir, stop. It's not actually like supposed to do it."
Because we weren't ready back then.
Well, yeah, because the regulation, it was literally not legal, right? And so then, but I realized where they were coming from. Regulators have to protect the public, right? QRs can be falsified. There's like many security reasons, and if you don't understand, it is actually safer to stop it. I mean, the young me was such an injustice, whatever, right? So, but I still went, and then eventually, actually, we made a short movie about QR, about how the QR actually can be open, how it can be collaborative. It was a fictional movie. The movie went viral, and guess what? BI called me to their office. And they said, "Aldi, please explain to us what you do, because it seems like you're a naughty boy, but you have a very good intention, right?" And so I explained QR. I spent 4 hours explaining QR technology and how I want it to be different from China. How, first of all, it's going to be open for all the banks to participate, right? How it has to be collaborative, how the pricing has to be set by BI, so it's not monopolistic, and how it has to be accessible. And if you let these devices win, like the machines win, then only like a few 100,000 merchants will have access to it. So after BI kind of finally opened up their eyes, they said, "Okay, but please talk to the other people." So through the associations, right? Through ASPI, the Payment Association, I started talking to the banks. And again, banks also have good intentions. Indonesians, I think generally, they want to help the country together. So when they explained that this concept of open QR is good, the banks started being on board. Yeah. And then of course, you know who also matters? Religious leaders. Right? Like, no joke, this matters, right? So what did I do? We opened up a zakat QR. I'm very lucky.
Which is brilliant.
Yeah, right.
Because it's like more of our thing, our cultural thing.
Exactly. So we invested in Kitabisa. We put QRs in every mosque, and you would like pay with QR. And then the religious leaders were like, "You know what? Actually, donations went up by like double, almost, even more." So then religiously, this is good. Oh, Indonesia, religiously good, lots of money, good for business, right? So that's how it worked. And you can see today, the payments for QR, when I took over Gopay, we had like, maybe at the time, 2018, we had 1,000 transactions per day, not even, right? We had maybe 30, 40 merchants. Today, with QRIS, right, we have 35 million merchants. And that's very clearly inclusive, right? Sorry, it's very clearly inclusive because everybody's on it, right? It's also very clearly collaborative. It wasn't just Gopay doing it, right? In China, it's just Alipay, right? And Tencent. No, this was everybody. It was the whole country, and BI led it. And finally, guess what? Arshad just said, we're launching it regionally in ASEAN. And ASEAN has been embracing it. So this framework works not just for Indonesia, but for ASEAN, to be both collaborative, global, and inclusive. And this works in every sector. Like Pak Husodo has a banana farm, right? I went to his farm. I met his farmer. And it's a small business. The person doing the quality assurance is a small business. And he told me that he's very proud that he can export the banana to Japan, I think. Even though sometimes you get rejects by Japan, right? But very little, right? But my point is actually that it's inclusive and it's global, and I think this is how we can drive policy. And for me, right, the hardest part about this framework is actually not the global or the collaborative. It's actually the inclusive side. And that's why I'm actually in the Chamber of Commerce now, right? And that's why personally I put my money where my mouth is. I've invested in small businesses. So I've invested about 40 small businesses. And 2 of them also already export. So Kopi Kalian has a Japanese branch, and Tenyu, which is a fashion brand, has exported to Thailand and Philippines. So my thing is actually, let's start doing this. Let's start investing in small businesses that can go global.
Okay. So what I can conclude from both of your perspective was like there has to be some inclusivity in both policy, of course, and there it should be more collaborative action from all the small and medium industries, right? So because it wouldn't work if we're just handing it to the policymakers, we're just handing it to the governments and so on. But before answering my question, I would like to open the first session of question and answers. So if any of the distinguished guests here in this Vanda ballroom would like to ask question for both our young leaders right now, I think I have like 1 or 2 opportunities to ask questions. If there's any of the distinguished guests who would like to ask questions, because I cannot wait for them to answer my questions. Okay? Is there any?
Going once?
Going once?
This is really a test of everybody's listening.
Yes, they're eager to answer any kind of questions. They're trying to make jokes and everything. Okay, sure, please. But I think I have to hand the microphone so everybody can hear.
Hi, Avengers.
Hi.
I like that, Avengers.
So I have questions to both of you, right? The reason I'm late, actually, I'm in the Zoom call in the LKS tripartite, where every year Indonesia has annual discussions on minimum wage and what's not. Minimum wage and what's not. And, you know, yesterday we were in the round table with Myanmar, with Philippines, with Vietnam. And I'm proud to become ASEAN-backed Avengers. However, I'm also in fear for Indonesia. Since both of you are Indonesians, can you give me a clue for the labor intensive in Indonesia, that the level of education is not as high as we are all here in this room? So how we can mitigate this with all the climate policy, with all, you know, we are not poor status anymore. And I hear you, Mas Aldi, about the Wikipreneur, but I also mentor for micro and small business. It's not that easy, not because they are not willing, but they also do not have a deep understanding how to be there, how to be resilient.
Yeah.
So how we, the young generations of Indonesia, try to lift up the rest of the 99.5%, so not to left behind and become ASEAN leaders, as what Professor Kishore mentioned. Because he mentioned about China, India, and ASEAN. We don't even talk about China and India first. Within ASEAN, we see everyone is already up there. 10 years ago, I talked with the government of Indonesia about Vietnam, fear. But Indonesia does not listen. And on textile and garment, we are way behind. So how can we not way behind when we are actually up there?
Yep.
You are saying it, that we are actually still resource-based. We are not human-based. So how we can lift up Indonesia as the big brother of ASEAN first?
Thank you very much. I think the words of the terms of big brother itself, it's some kind of encouragement. Also, we have the hardest responsibility to live up for that term. Maybe Mas Aldi first, and then Mbak Afu can add to it.
Yeah, so, okay, the reality is, right, if we try to increase our productivity of labor to be as efficient as China or even Vietnam, it's hard.
Oh,
right? It's very difficult, right? And so how, right? That's the question.
Yeah.
So when I was in Japan, actually, for Kadin, trying to figure out what to do with SMEs, one of the things I learned was Japanese were very good about making shoes, like really high-end shoes. So everybody loves made in Japan shoes. So I went to Takashi Maya, I think, and I asked them which Japanese shoes should I buy. And they took me to the third floor, and there was this shoe brand. His name was Jaran Sriwijaya. Jaran apparently means jalan, and Sriwijaya is actually Indonesia. So apparently, one of the most expensive and highly made shoe in a Japanese department store was made in Bandung by a factory called Fortuna. So then what happened was, then I tried to figure out, again, the gotong royong approach. I started WhatsApping all the embassy people, trying to figure out does anybody know the owner of this brand in Japan? And finally, we had a gathering in BNI with all of people like that. And I met, his name is Yokose-san, and he said, Aldi, if you want your country to win in manufacturing, stop being like China or Vietnam. He said, I have traveled all over Southeast Asia looking for a partner to make high-end shoes. And Indonesian craftsmanship is second only to Italian.
Second only to Italian.
And he said, so what happened, what he said was, so I helped train and mentor this factory so that they can produce Japanese quality shoes that is able to be sold globally, right? And he did this over the course of 10 years. It was a mentorship thing, right? So that's, I think, where we can win is high craft, not high output or low price. And so if we can become the LVMH of Asia, right? Rather than just, because there's a lot of craftsmen that sell to LVMH right now, and we train them, then it will work. So the Wikipreneur, as you mentioned, is trying to get a lot of Japanese craftsmen who are all old and potentially dying, right? so that they can train Indonesian craftsmen who are labor intensive so that we can produce high quality goods in shoes, in fashion, in furniture. We even did a BCG analysis of this, and we found that the sectors where we have the most advantage is textile and food, basically, it's fine foods. So again, it matches our capabilities. So we should stop trying to pretend somebody we're not, and embrace the fact that our SMEs are good at crafts and high quality products, and we should make them go global.
Thank you, Mas Aldi.
Yeah, I really appreciate and I actually love this question because I think it's, in the case of climate change, right, fundamentally, it's a social justice issue. So we can't talk about climate change without actually thinking about the 99%. It is an issue of the 99%. It is an issue of how the 1% has caused all the emissions level that we see today, right? So that's why when it comes to the policies that we need to push forward, right, it has to focus or it has to think and consider the end-to-end cycle of the transition, right? So in the case of, for example, carbon pricing policy, it shouldn't just stop at pricing the carbon-intensive sectors. It should also think about how the revenues generated from that policy should be retargeted towards the ones that are most vulnerable and affected by the transition. And I would say that categorically, right, there are at least three types of challenge in terms of, because we're right now dealing with energy transition and land transition. In the energy sector, we're talking about jobs that will fundamentally disappear, right?
Yeah,
we do want eventually with a just and gradual process for the fossil fuel industry to transition out, for the coal industry to phase out, and we want manufacturing, for that. So for those type of sectors, we do need vocational reskilling, upskilling type of policy alongside with the policies directly affecting the industries itself. But on the manufacturing sector, the challenge is very different because it's not about disappearing jobs. It's jobs that will slightly change, right? It's not about the operators of a boiling machine, for example, that will disappear, but it will be a different kind of boiling machine. So we're considering a different kind of approach for this type of jobs. And finally, of course, it's the resource intensive, the natural primary sector jobs, land transition we're talking about. And there, I think more creative ways of thinking should be introduced. We should think about forest communities, especially type of targeted policies, so that they also take active part and are benefited from policies in terms of the land transition policies. At the same time, and this is what I've been doing with Ministry of Education as well, actually, we need to mainstream climate education across the board. So this is very fundamental, not just in terms of how they need to understand. As you said, we want them to be resilient, to understand the climate challenges. So understanding it is one thing, but also actually preparing the next generation of solutions, of innovators that will push forward and implement the right kind of climate solutions moving forward. So I think top-down policies focusing on transition, targeted on the most vulnerable groups. Bottom-up education reforms so that everyone can think on their, understand the challenge, actively participating in proposing solution, and especially as citizens that push the right policies to the government as well.
Thank you very much, Mbak. Thank you very much, Mbak, for the brilliant questions. I think we represent all the questions here. So I think to sum up, I would like to ask both of your perspective to what can be achieved and what can be implemented if we want to partnership. We want only not to Indonesia is growing, but also ASEAN as the epicenter of growth, like the theme of the ASEAN itself. So can you give like summary for the next go-to?
Yes, so number one, the big picture is that for ASEAN to be a prosperous, big economy by 2045, exactly, we need climate resilient policy as the backbone. And as backbones are, right, if the backbone is weak, everything will crumble down. So it's not just about growing the economy, it's about what kind of economy that we're shaping towards 2045. And in that journey, definitely partnership between the public sector and private sector becomes really critical. It starts with an alignment of vision. So we need to share this, we need to all agree first in this room, right, that sustainability, that low carbon growth is the way to go.
It is.
So that we can push for the right kind of policy, both from the private sector side and the public sector to provide the legal framework for a stronger PPP or public-private partnership moving forward.
Thank you very much. And Mas Aldi?
I'm going to have one ask for everybody in the audience, actually, very short. If you want to have Indonesian SMEs basically be global, be collaborative and inclusive, everybody here has some money and they have probably been asked by their cousin, ex-wife, ex-wife's brother-in-law, whoever, to invest in their small business, right? So in their small business. So if you have a small business that you've either invested in, have been asked, that you think has potential to go global or can be an example, ping me and I'll figure it out for you and we can take them global. Thank you very much.